So, the topic for this evening is we're going to discuss Shabbat a little bit. Maybe I'll recap slightly what I've been doing. Although you didn't have to be at the previous classes. Marilyn was all three, you guys were the first one. So in the last couple classes, we were looking at Paraduma and the Kohanim, and just trying to understand things in context and make sense of them. And the argument was, they're not these, maybe they're difficult to understand, maybe that, as you had mentioned before, chok is something that's difficult to understand, but if we look at them in their context and look at sort of how some corollaries in modern time, that we can make sense of these things, and it's based on human experience, and that there's content to the law is just not this sort of in opposition to the Leibovitchian and sort of the Brisker approach. If you're familiar with them, if not, this approach that God just commands and we just do. You know, we don't understand God, so we do it. To whatever extent that approach is, some people take that to the extreme, some people say that in certain cases and not in others, but I'm sort of coming out against that and saying there really is some ethic or content to the law, and if we look at it in context, it makes sense, and the content can be applied in our context. The form might look a little bit different, but we can take that content and try and apply it in our context. And with that, I'm going to try and address Shabbat, which is a big topic. And obviously, I'm getting here we're going to talk about cleaning on Shabbat specifically as an example, because Shabbat's a huge topic. But based on that background and sort of in that vein, I'm going to make sort of an extreme, I don't think it's that extreme, but what's considered an extreme argument, which is, have you heard the word malacha before? Mm-hmm. So, I don't know what you think malacha is, but I'm going to make the argument that malacha is actually work. Like, what you think of work is work. What have you heard is malacha before? Have you heard what is malacha?
Well, there's 39 types.
There's 39 types of malacha we've heard of before, okay? And maybe you've heard, you've heard any other things about malacha?
Like Rabbi Zev Khan was saying that, I'm having people for dinner upstairs. I can drag tables and chairs in the basement.
Yes,
It's physical labor, but that...
Right. Somehow it's not physical labor.
Yeah.
But what did he say it was? I'm very curious now.
Well, he says, I'm doing it for the purpose of Shabbat.
There's some sort of there's purpose involved for sure.
Yeah, and he says, but then I can't, separate things.
Oh, we're going to come back to that one. Right. So maybe you've heard, and just for sake of time, maybe you've heard it's like some positive creative act. Have you heard that before? Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah.
Creating or destroying.
What?
Creating
or destroying might, because there are certain examples that might be destroyed. Although, generally speaking, things that are destructive are actually not, or not at least biblically or on a Torah level prohibited. Although there are certain things like erasing, and that you erase in order to write in that spot, or you destroying as in breaking something apart, but also potentially with the intent to build or accomplish something. Okay, well, that's neither here nor there. The point is, I'm actually going to try and make the argument that malacha is work, is what we think of as work. Okay, so, which is not, I think, this idea of positive creative thing, I think that's a very new understanding of malacha if you actually look at classical sources, like as early as recent as the 20th century, and I'm not quite sure where it comes from. But it seems to be really common. Everybody seems to think that people talk about malacha like that. The idea of 39 malachot, and that based on the temple or the Mishkan, right? The work they did building the Mishkan, that's not new, as new. But that also, I guess it starts in the Mishnah, but it's sort of the shift frame that everything's got to fit in the 39 steps is also, I think, an Amoritic shift, but we're not even going to look at that. Okay, let's look at some biblical sources first. Is there a tissue? I apologize. It's the season. Thank you very much. Okay. Let's look at Dvarim. Deuteronomy. This is my favorite version of the Ten Commandments. You're not supposed to have favorites, right? But there are two different versions of the Ten Commandments. But this is my favorite version of the mitzvah Shabbat because it's much more explicit, much easier to understand what's going on. So I guess I have two questions here. Who cannot work and what type of work is prohibited? So basically let's look, at least in this first source, who's not allowed to work and why are they not allowed to work? So here we go. Yud Aleph 11 in Parakeh chapter 5. Shemor Yom HaShabbat L'Kadasho. You should guard the Sabbath to make it holy. Kasher Tzivcha Adonai Elohecha. Because that's just as God has commanded you. Sheish Yamim Ta'avod V'Asich Malachta. 6 days you have to work and do your, I'm claiming do your work, but do your malacha. V'yom HaShvi Shabbat L'Adonai Elohecha Lo Tasecho Malacha Ta Vincha V'Vitecha V'Avtecha V'Amatecha V'Shorcha V'Chamorcha V'Chol V'Emtecha V'Gerecha Asher B'Shorecha L'man Yenuach Avdecha V'Avtecha Kamocha. Okay, let's take that, it's a big one. Let's take it apart. So, the seventh day, 6 days you're supposed to work, you're supposed to do your work or your malacha. On the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord, your God. Don't do any malacha, I'm going to argue is work. Now, who's working? You, your son, your daughter, your slave, your male slave, your female slave, your ox, your donkey, any other of your animals, and your ger, which is the foreigner in the simplicity of the simple understanding of what a ger is, not to get into the politic of that, but the foreigner, even non-Jews, that are in your gates, that live amongst you. And this is the key line, I guess. Laman yanuach avdecha v'amatcha kamocha. In order that your slave, your male and female slave, can work like you. V'zacharta, let me finish it off and then we'll go back. V'zacharta ki eved ayita be'eretz Mitzrayim. You have to remember, because you were a slave in the land of Egypt. V'yotzicha Adonai lech misham b'yad chazaka v'zro'ata. And God brought you out of there with a strong arm and a strong hand and an outstretched arm. Al kein tzivcha Adonai lech lasot et Yom HaShabbat. That's why God commanded you to do work. So, first of all, who can't work? Or who can't do malacha, according to this? Pretty much everyone. Although there is one person who's strikingly absent from this list, considering who the Torah normally is addressing. The wife is strikingly absent here, but we'll see she is included in a later source, by implication at least. But it seems like everybody, including you, but why do we rest? According to this, at least. And there may be more than one approach to why we rest, but it's very explicit here. Why do we rest? Not because God created the world in 7 days. Why?
God took a 7 day.
Right. So why do we have to rest?
Because God commanded.
Aha. But it says very explicitly, Laman Yanuach. Where is it? Laman Yanuach Avdecha v'Amtecha kamocha. In order that
your servants should be able to rest
like you.
Because
what does that mean?
God took you out of Egypt, so you didn't have to rest, have to work every day.
Well, we remember what it was like to be the slaves. But now we're not the slaves. Who normally doesn't need a day of rest? Let's put it this way. Who doesn't need a day of rest? Who gets the rest or gets the vacation or who gets to do it, doesn't have to work if they don't want to, usually?
The people who own the slaves.
The opposite. Come. Oh, okay. The people who don't need a day of rest, who can rest usually on demand because they want to, are the people who have money and are wealthy, right? You know, if you own the company, you can take, okay, maybe you work hard. I'm not saying the people who don't own the companies don't work hard, but the people who are in the higher classes generally don't need like a day of rest. The people who need the day of rest are the slaves here, okay? And by proxy, the people, I guess in our context, the people who are, working 2 part-time jobs just to make ends meet, I'm just taking some of the most extreme, single fathers, single mothers, whatever it is, the people who are working like dogs and getting paid almost nothing, but they also need a day of rest, because otherwise they're going to be working nonstop, so there's a clear, and to tell me if I'm wrong, there's a clear ethic here. The point of Shabbat is that everyone can rest. It's a day of equality. It's a day when everyone gets a day off, okay? Questions? Okay, so then now we have to understand what is malacha. What are we resting from? So if you look in Shemot, this is shortly, I want to say, after. No, sorry, this is after the Ten Commandments in Shemot. Excuse me, not shortly. Or is it before? Now I'm forgetting. What? After. That's what I thought. Okay, you guys keep me on my toes. All right, Shesh Yamim Tavav V'Yom HaShvish Tishbot. Very, very terse. Becharisha B'Katzir Tishbot. So 6 days you rest, 7th you don't. I guess you can translate this in two different ways, but for my purposes it doesn't really matter. From the harvest, or from the plowing season and the harvest, or from plowing and reaping, you should rest. So what kind of things are prohibited on Shabbat? What is malacha, according to this, in a very terse sense?
Agriculture.
Yeah, agriculture. So, which is, especially if you're living in the desert, but also when you get to Israel, pretty much the main occupation that people have. Not the only occupation, but that's work, right? That's what people work. Okay. So so it sounds like, at least from this, that you could really understand malacha as work from a biblical point of view. So did the rabbis skew it? So we'll see. But I don't think so. But okay, let's look later in Shemot. Not much, but one paragraph later. Vaykel Moshe kol adat b'nei Yisrael, v'yomer alehem ela dvar meshutvad Adonai la'asod otam. This God gathers the people. Moses gathers the people and tells them this is what God commanded. Shesha yamim ta'aseh malachta. I think this is in. I don't remember, right? Okay. Shesh yamim ta'aseh malachtecha v'yom hashvi'i yeh lachem kodesh Shabbat Shabbaton l'Adonai kol ha'oseh bo malacha yumat. So 6 days, you do work. On the 7th day is the holy day for the Shabbaton, the rest day for God. Anyone who does work on that day will die. That's for death penalty. Okay, interesting. We don't do that anymore. In any case, Gimel, lo tavaru ish b'chol moshvotechem b'yom Shabbat. You shall not light a fire in your houses or in your dwellings on Shabbat. What were people lighting fires in their houses for?
Cooking.
Cooking?
Light.
Could be lights.
Heat.
Heat. Although they are in the desert in Israel, so it's yes for heat, but it's not like Chicago. Not as bad. The other possibility could be, what else would people potentially be using fire for in that context? What?
Sacrifices?
Yes, but then it turns out that you're allowed to actually light fires for sacrifices, or at least use fires. Yes, that's good. I hadn't thought about that one. I wasn't thinking of that. Potentially, if you're really seeing malacha as work, it could be someone who's forging something, maybe. I would think metal work. Okay. Making a furnace, very important for metallurgy. Okay. But then, if you're not allowed to cook, who is implicitly also supposed to rest on Shabbat? Who's normally doing the cooking in that context?
Wife.
What?
The wife.
The wife, right. So even though she was off the list, she wasn't on the list, I think by implication she's included. And we're going to come back to this. So it is very interesting, I will point out, right, fire can be used for non-work things, right? And then there's a whole debate, actually, a Tannaitic debate about whether it's actually malacha or it's not malacha, but it's whether it's considered malacha or not. So you could make the argument that even though it's prohibited, it's not actually malacha, because it doesn't say it's malacha. But the point is, in a sense, fire in their time, although a little bit different, is a little bit like electricity in our time in a sense, which electricity in our time can be used for plenty of work things, and plenty of not work things like light and heat and air conditioning, but it can also be used for lots and lots of work things like what my rabbi from college said, if it weren't for the fact that we had to turn the phones off and close the computers, we probably would be working on, that's what 90 tons of work is done on computers these days. And by saying electricity is off limits, that's prohibiting most work that people do for their jobs, a lot of it. In any case, that being said, it can be used for work things and non-work things. There's a policy. The policy is it's prohibited across the board because that's what, in the language of the rabbis, would be what's called lo plu. We don't distinguish. Meaning, the point is, we can't just say it's hard for people to distinguish when it's okay to use electricity and when it's not. So we take a hard line against electricity, or when it's okay to use fire or not. So that may be a policy decision. But in any case, not to get into how policy decisions are decided or upheld. Here it seems like by God. and upheld by Moses and the people. And then someone perhaps got a death penalty, not for lighting the fire. But in any case, the point is, women are also allowed or actually need to rest, and they're part of the everyone that gets to rest on Shabbat. And the work now that I'm saying is not just the work that you go out to the fields and the work you get paid for, so to say, but also the housework, right? Cooking is housework, so we're going to come back to that as housework. Just another source to reinforce the idea that we're talking really about work, and we're not talking about some positive creative act or something we can't really understand and just have to do, is in the Mechilta, which is a Tannaitic Midrash, early, around 200, give or take, on Shemot. It's a Midrash Halacha, on looking at actually the first set of 10 Commandments, which is in Perek Kaf, right? That Kaf Aleph is right after. It's in Mishpatim, right? Kaf Aleph would be in Mishpatim then?
Yes.
Okay, that makes sense. Shesh Yamim Tavot, so the last source on page 1. 6 days your work. Is it really possible that you can do all of your work in 6 days? Ella, shvot ki'ilu malachacha asuya. You have to rest as if all of your work is done. So, davar acher, we'll come back and discuss what that means. Shvot mimachshavat avodah. So, and again they use the word avodah here, although shesh yamim tavot. But rest from any thought of work. And work here, the first line is malacha, here is avodah. It seems the same to me. But in either case, you shouldn't have any thoughts of work. V'omer im tashiv mi Shabbat reglecha, and they're quoting from Yeshayahu, that some famous lines, V'omer as titaknag al Adonai, if you rest from, how you translate it, they translate it probably, if you rest your foot from on Shabbat, basically, then Shabbat will be, you will rejoice in God, delight in God, in the Lord. Okay. The point is, and this is one of those cases where the two different understandings really aren't super different. They're probably just different expressions of really the same thing. The point is, you can't really finish all your work. You got to get back. Sunday, you got to get back to work, or Monday in our system. But you got to get back to the grind. But just try and keep it all. There should be one day where you shouldn't have to think about it. You shouldn't have to be worried about all the time that your work's going to be done. You have to do this thing. You have to do this thing. So if that's the case, right, we can define work. Any questions or comments about that first? Okay. If that's the case, we really can define work. You can't define work as something you're paid for, because it could be housework, and it could be something you do. So how can we define work? So it's anything that'll give us this idea that we've got all these responsibilities. You got to do this and you got to do this. So when it comes out, and I think it's very clear from this coming source, I'll just preface it here, is things that are long-term preparatory acts end up being considered off limits. As sort of, I would say, as a characterization, malacha, or things that are called work, are characterized by long-term preparatory acts. Things that you have to get that done, basically. Okay, and how does that come out into the realm of housework? So if you look at the Tosefta, which is also the time of the Mishnah, 0 to 200, common era, give or take, different editor, in Shabbat, it talks about doing dishes on Shabbat. So says the Tosefta, Madichim kelim mishabbat lo'oto Shabbat, avolo mishabbat l'Shabbat acher. Ketzad. So you can wash dishes from a Shabbat to that Shabbat, and not to the next Shabbat. You can't prepare things for next Shabbat. How does it work? Let's say you ate on these dishes Friday night. You can rinse them off, or you can clean them so that you can eat on them in the morning. If you use them in the morning, I guess before the main meal, then you can wash them so that they could be used at the main meal. If you ate on these dishes at the meal, that's probably the meal after shul, then you can eat them during mincha, maybe that's Sudah Shlishit, whatever, the meal later in the afternoon, or just snacks later in the afternoon. Mincha lo yadichan. After mincha time, that would be later in the afternoon, or later in the afternoon, you should not, at that point, do any more dishes. Me'ata, הכוסות נתין כל היום כולו מפני שאין קו על השתייה. So the exception being cups. Cups, the idea is someone could want to drink anytime. There's no set times. I think their food intake was more regimented even than ours is. You know, there's the morning meal and the afternoon meal, and maybe there's the appointed snack times, but basically you could drink, people drink whenever they want to drink, so you can do you can wash your cups anytime. If you want to wash all 10 of them at a time, that's fine. Who knows? 10 people might need to drink. So that's the one exception. So because people use them all the time, or they could use them at any point. So what comes out of this source? It's very clear that what's prohibited here.
Preparing for after Shabbat.
It's very clear. Preparing for after Shabbat. You know, and this is not, the dishes is not officially malacha, right? It's not officially malacha. It's not one of the 39, but if you look at a lot of these, I would argue, which we don't have time to look at them all inside, but if you look at the 39 different things that are called malacha, they're either work because they're what people in their context did for a job, and or they had this preparatory component to them, which we're trying to avoid because we're trying to. And what do you do when you're not pressed by you have to do this, you have to do this, you're preparing for that, you're preparing for this? You can do what you're supposed to do on Shabbat, which is, what do we do on Shabbat? I probably should mention that since I've been really focusing on what you can't do on Shabbat. What do we do on Shabbat? Pray, eat,
Be happy.
be happy, right? Enjoy, study, you know, spend time with your family, friends, you know. Those are the things you should be doing on Shabbat, not running off to do this and running off to do this and all the obligations you have. So that's okay. And then there's probably, I think those are the main things that people do on Shabbat. But if I'm missing one, forgive me. Okay, so what? Nap. Yes. You know, there is, right, you're physically trained, potentially. It's the day of rest. But, right, from all that work you were doing, the malacha, which I'm claiming is work. Okay. Oh, we're doing good. Okay, so let's talk about sweeping specifically. Okay, and why I took sweeping for an example. So, I'm doing a lot of methodology in this class. So, basically, maybe you don't hear this rhetoric, but I hear this rhetoric a lot. This rhetoric of, we hold like this, I hold like this, the opinion that I abide by or subscribe to is this, and everyone else is rejected. You know, we don't accept what the other people do. Maybe you don't hear this rhetoric here at Anshe Shalom because everyone's so open and welcoming, and I hope that they are, but the idea that, you know, we're right, you're wrong, kind of rhetoric, but it's got many different forms. We hold by this, the Mishnah Berurah says this, so we do it, whatever it is. There's a lot of rhetoric like that. So, and not in halacha, you know, not in Jewish sources, also in politics and other things. But my specialty is by far not politics, so we're going to look at halacha. So I wanted to give this example because I think the halacha is not monolithic, so it's a lot of different people over a lot of different generations. So there are people who have taken those kind of stances, like we do. I think, you know, this is what I believe, and the other people are wrong. But we will see amongst the voices here people who are not just rejecting outright other people, but saying, oh, well, they have, you know, trying to find some sort of compromise, trying to incorporate some of the insights from the opposing positions, which I think if you look. It's hard to make claims about the entirety of halacha, but there's a lot of that. I think the more halacha and the more that you learn, you see that more. You know, positions that are officially, we rejected from earlier sources as early as the Mishnah, as early as the Gemara. You know, we don't hold like that Gemara, but you see the ideas in the voices, the ideas from those Gemaras come up later or come up as a compromise between. Okay, so that was the preface to this section. So, in the Tosefta, now looking at, again, early sources, or early rabbinic sources. Mechabed b'Shabbat chayav chatat. So the unnamed position, it's not unnamed. Uviyam tov laket arbim divrei Rabbi Elazar. Rabbi Elazar's position, who's probably a Rabbi Eliezer or Lazar, there's actually a couple of them, but probably, if I remember correctly, part of Beit Shammai, but not important for this conversation. But anyone who sweeps on Shabbat is liable for a sin offering, or lashes if it's Yom Tov. Meaning, those are the penalties given for D'oraita prohibitions. Torah level prohibitions, I guess from the Torah prohibitions. I would call them Torah level prohibitions, central core prohibition violations. They get the worst punishment. Chatat, normally the sin offering is when you do it accidentally, you didn't realize, but you only do it for things that are actually melacha, or at least Torah level prohibitions on Shabbat or Yom. V'chachamim omrim bein b'Shabbat bein b'Yom patur ve'eno chayav kim shvut. So the chachamim, the rabbis, the sages, they say no, it is prohibited sweeping, but it's not a Torah level prohibition. It's patur. Meaning you're exempt from bringing a sin offering if you swept on Shabbat, unknowingly that you didn't know you weren't supposed to do that. You're violating what's called a shvut, which is generally thought to be some sort of rabbinic level or non-core violation. Okay. Questions about that before we see the next source? Okay.
Does it say why?
That is a good question. I don't think so. Meaning bring like a scriptural proof? I don't think so. I will tell you, I did cut out some pieces here. I'm pretty sure that's not what I cut out. I think the Tosefta and the Mishnah to varying degrees are less less really worried about how to connect rules to scriptural sources. The Gemara does that a lot. The Midrash does that a lot. Also this idea, the later Gemara has this idea that one verse goes with one, sometimes when they're doing arguments, one verse goes with one explanation, one drasha, but that is certainly not necessarily true across the board. A lot of times you'll have many explanations for the same verse, but I got out of sight. The answer is I don't think so. I'm pretty sure no. From my point of view, it's because they're sweeping, right? Which goes back to the same reason you'd be prohibited from, right, it's not one of the 39. This is one of the arguments why the Mishnah, maybe the Mishnah is in that model and the Tosefta is not, but maybe not even the Mishnah. Maybe the Mishnah was just giving examples when they mention these 39. They're not saying this is like the 39 that it has to be set up. Anything that's called malacha or work has to be one of those 39. That seems to be a later Amoritic construct. Okay, but from my point of view, the argument is because it is work and it's housework, according to what we've
if you're
defined.
sweeping, though, for the next meal on Shabbat?
Right, so then that's the question, which we're going to get into the next source and into the next few sources, which is there ever a time that you're allowed to? And, what if it's for immediate use? And I guess the gain with the dishes is very clear. You can eat on them, and you're supposed to eat on Shabbat, right? Is it worth it to, which we're going to discuss or is going to come up in the sources, is it worth it to sweep? Should you just leave the floor dirty until after Shabbat? Would be because you don't see that as essential, something that needs to be done now. But we'll see that come up in later sources. Let's look at the next one, which is from around the same time. Shabbat Rabban Gamliel hayu mechabdim bein amitot Yom Tov. So maybe Yom Tov is on Yom Tov Chag, on a holiday, it's more lenient just because some things are more lenient, but so we're going to see then not make that distinction in a second, but there's some testimony that in the house of Rabban Gamliel, who was famous Nasi, actually was head of the Sanhedrin, that they used to sweep between the beds, but the mitot here are not beds they sleep on. They would recline and eat. I'm not sure if you're aware, but they had more like couch-like things they would eat on, and they had have like tray table kind of things. They didn't have like one big table with chairs. Think Pesach Seder, but like all the time, a little bit. So when they say bein mitot, they mean where they ate. Okay, Amar Rebbe Eliezer ben Reb Tzadok. I don't know if this is the same Rebbe Eliezer from the last source, but maybe not. Pamim habayachanu bebeit Rabban Gamliel. I ate there at Rabban Gamliel's house all the time. V'lo reitim shem mechabdim et hamitot. I never saw them sweep on Yom Tov. Elastinim hayu prosim me'erev Shabbat k'shorchim nechnasim misalkin otam. Sorry, me'erev Yom Tov. I said. I read it wrong. K'shorchim nechnasim misalkin otam. So on Erev Yom Tov, on the Erev, the day before the holiday, they'd set out these sheets of sorts. some sort of cloth over, I guess, either the floor or the little couches. And then when the guests were about to come, they would like fold it up. It's kind of like our disposable tablecloths, except for they would throw them away. Maybe or just a tablecloth in general. But they sort of put it out, and then when the guest comes, so this comes back to your point. Maybe if you're having guests, it's got to look nicer in your house because you're worried that people are gonna, what are people gonna think? Amrulo in Cain, After Shabbat Nusar Lasso Cain. So I don't know if this is a concession, but if that, at least to that latter point, you can do this trick where you put the sheets out, even on Shabbat. That's not, don't think that Yom Tov is more normal. So there, you can see from this source, there is some driving force, yes, to make sure it's clean. There's maybe we're trying to find a simpler solution so you don't have to spend all this time sweeping. But it's not unheard of that there'd be a reason why you would want to sweep on Shabbat or Yom Tov or both. Okay, here we go. Now looking at some later sources. The Torah is, I want to say 15th century, is the son of the Rush. Rabbeinu Asher is one of the later Tosfot, which is part of this French-German school. The Rush, he, I believe, moved to Spain. I think he was fleeing. There's a lot of persecution, the Crusades, and other persecution in that area, in the Rhine area, and in Germany. I think he was in Germany. I can't remember right now, but he moved to Spain, and he set up shop there, but he kept a lot of his Ashkenazi customs, even though the Sephardic customs were different. So we see this is one example of that. But his son, the Torah, wrote this really extensive halachic work that was the precursor to the Shulchan Aruch, which is one of the, is considered authoritative. In any case, where he quotes a lot of the earlier medieval commentaries, and then the Beit Yosef, which is Rav Yosef Cairo, who was 16th century, sort of quotes even more and comes to his own conclusions. Okay, here we go. And another point of background on this source, a lot of the conversation here, you ask, where did they get this idea that sweeping is prohibited? So the Gemara, when it talks about it, sets it up as, in this category, there's a whole discussion about things that you don't necessarily intend to do, but will necessarily happen, even if you don't intend to do them, quote unquote, even though you know what's going to happen. And we're going to see, it gets, one of the 39 malachot is, within them is this idea of digging pits and things, what are they called when they make it in the fields?
Furrows?
Yeah. When they, in any case, plowing. But part of that is digging holes and making holes and also just leveling off the ground. So they're worried sweeping might be leveling off the ground, and even if you're not really trying to, you're trying to clean, you're not trying to level off the ground, then it's inevitably you're going to level off the ground, maybe. Okay, so that's the background here. We'll see it inside a little bit. If you don't, there's a whole big conversation about that, which I'm trying to avoid a little bit because that's not the main point here. Well, in any case, so a case where it's so it's a case where even if you don't intend it to happen, it's going to happen, no matter what. It's necessarily going to happen. Is prohibited. It's called psik reisha, meaning the phrase comes from if you cut off the chicken's head, it's certainly v'lo yamut. Is it really possible it's not going to die? It's going to die. Meaning you can't say, and this could be a reference to slaughtering, which is also work in a sense. It's paid and preparatory. But you can't say I'm going to cut this chicken's head off and it's not going to die. It's certainly going to die. That was the origin of that phrase. But the idea is you can't say that you don't intend it to happen, or even if you don't intend to happen, if it's going to happen, then it's prohibited as a policy. Okay, hilkach. But he uses this reasoning to state, Mutar l'Beit Beit kivan she'eino mekavel ashvot gomot ela shelo ya'aleh avak. So we're talking about dirt floors, not rug, not tile, not wood, but dirt floors. You're allowed to sprinkle water because you don't really want to level off the ground. What you're really intending to do is just to make sure that the dust doesn't come up. It's just to make it a little damp so you don't have a dusty house. Uvaha. who is the Hilchot Gedolah, which is actually, I think there's some controversy as to who wrote it, but it's a Gaonic work, it seems 9th century, I think in Bavel in Iraq, modern day Iraq, code. Hitir gam kin lechabed habayit b'chol makom. He says it's permitted to sweep in any case. It doesn't matter. But Rambam Maimonides, 12th century Spain, but he lived in Egypt. He actually lived in northern Africa also for a little while. But famous Egyptian, 12th century. Hitir b'makom ha'meratzof asur b'shein ha'meratzof. So he said it was okay to sweep if it's tiled, but it's prohibited to sweep if it's a dirt floor. You know, what would the argument be for that?
The tile's already level. It's
Right.
just-
So from the technical point of view, yes, it's already level. From a cleaning point of view, you know, it's already dirt, so just leave it. Or, you know, you can sweep a dirt floor and it'll never be clean, right? You'll just level off, then you'll get to leveling off the floor, because that's how much you have to do, right? That's how you can read it with that. Okay. B'chilek b'sika, but he made a distinction. We're going to come back to this. Shektav ein sachina karka ve'ein madichinot hafilu im hu merotzaf. Gzera atu she'enu merotzaf da'atu la'ashvo yekumo. Which is interesting because technically you're not supposed to do things like this, but it's not a problem for him in this case. He says you can't do what Israelis call sponja. You can't do, here it's oiling, maybe greasing. I don't know if they had soap, but basically soaping or rinsing down the floor. Meaning you could sprinkle water on it, according to that opinion, but not, you know, hose it down or do modern day mopping, I guess. Why? Because it is a decree less for the mirotzah, for the tiled floors, lest you come to level off the non-tiled floors, the dirt floors. So it's sort of, it's a decree on a decree, which you're not technically supposed to do, but we'll see how it makes sense a little bit later. Okay, Rabbeinu Yitzchak. There's Rabbeinu Yitzchak of Don Pierre, the famous Tosfot, the nephew of Rabbeinu Tam, the great-grandson of Rashi. Asar gamba kibu b'chol makom. He was stringent in every case, meaning there's across the board. Someone who's lenient, someone who's strict, who won't sweep at all, and somewhere in the middle. Va'adoni avi harosh, my father, my master, the Rosh, who was the one who had moved. Zal katav b'tshuva sheila al kibud nogi misr ba'ashkenaz. He said in Germany they had the custom, like Rabbeinu Yitzchak, not to sweep. Uveretz azot somchim al divrei Rav Alfas. In this land, meaning Spain, I think it was in Catalonia, not 100%. I had to double check, or maybe Barcelona. Excuse me. They swept, and they relied on the opinion of Rav Alfas, who is likely the Rif. He's from famous 11th century North African, Algerian, modern day Algeria is where he lived, rabbi. V'lo malani libi lo osor lehem ki lo hayu shomim li. This is what the Rosh said. Remember, he was Ashkenazi in a place that had not allowed anyone to sweep, came to this place in Spain where everyone was sweeping, and he said, I couldn't bring my heart to tell them it's prohibited. I don't know exactly what this means. Literally, it means this matter is, or they're hung in a tree, the matter's hung in a tree, a big tree, like it's up in the air. Why should I make them intentional sinners? Meaning, he didn't want to touch this issue, he didn't want to touch, maybe it was them. I didn't know exactly how to translate this statement. But basically, he didn't want to tell them it was prohibited because he was worried they wouldn't listen to him anyway, so then they would just be wanton sinners, intentional sinners. So, interesting bit of history at this point. So, where are we standing? Basically, we've got people who, a little bit similar to how we had a disagreement, although not exactly, between Rebbe Eliezer and Chachamim, one who was more lenient, one who was more strict. But we've got people who basically are saying it's definitely permitted to sweep, people who are saying it's definitely prohibited to sweep, no matter what, and then this middle opinion, which we're going to come back to. which is sometimes it's prohibited to sweep, depending on the floor and the type of sweeping, or the type of cleaning. What's the problem? Maybe I'll mention here. What's the problem with mopping? Even on tiled floors, the Rambam wouldn't let you do mopping or hosing or anything like that. He says it's a decree on a decree.
Seems like he's saying that you can't mop a tile floor because then you might think that you can
Right.
mop dirt floor.
Right. Which makes, I guess, the logic makes sense. Does the logic make
It
sense?
should also then apply to sweeping.
Right. It's hard to apply the logic across the board in a technical sense, but if you think of this, if you think of it more in a practical sense, if you think of it, he's imagining that sweeping the dirt floor is like you're just sweeping, you keep sweeping because you keep cleaning and cleaning and cleaning until finally you just level out the floor because there's no real way to clean this thing. Then he sees as an extension of that hosing down or mopping a tile floor because that's that kind of cleaning. Meaning it's a heavy-duty cleaning. You're allowed to do some cleaning on Shabbat, but not heavy-duty cleaning. Light cleaning. That's the argument I'm making.
What if you spill something?
That's a good question. It's a good question. So in theory, this is what this is all talking about, but I actually did include on the last page some practical parameters if you're really interested. Not really. Hopefully we'll get to that. I got to keep moving through the sources then. But basically, some practical parameters for today, sort of what the modern 20th, 21st century, 20th century post-game, sort of their opinions on this issue. But right now, if you spill something, we got opinions across the board that from it's definitely permitted to it's definitely prohibited to maybe it's permitted, depending on what kind of sweeping you're doing and what kind of floor, what kind of cleaning and what kind of floor. Okay, so with the Rosh and the Tur and Rabbeinu Yitzchak as sort of their background, the Ashkenazi custom is to be stricter, and with the Rambam, the main Sephardic poskim taking a little bit more lenient approach, the Rambam and the Rif. It's not surprising that the Shulchan Aruch of Yosef Karo, who's carrying the Spanish tradition, is a little bit more lenient, and the Ramah, who's 16th century in Poland, is a little bit more strict. I'm actually going to, so in the next source, I'm just going to read the tabbed over piece, because really the Shulchan Aruch just paskins like the Rambam. It's really the same. But the Rambam, the Ramah, who's a Rav Moshe Israelis here, 16th century Poland, says on this issue, some people are strict not to sweep even if it's tiled floor. That was Rabbeinu Yitzchak that we saw before, skipping the parentheses. That's the custom in Poland now, and we should not change the custom. Don't tell people it's okay. I guess, right. Umihu al yidei akum mutar. It's allowed to sweep the floor by asking a non-Jew to do it. Okay, so I have to give a whole class on why on Malachat Goy, which we said, by the way, you're not allowed to let the non-Jew work. But let's just think on a real simple level. When do we ask the non-Jews to do stuff for us on Shabbat? Usually, right? Because why would you ask them to turn on lights? Why don't you just turn on the lights yourself? Or why don't you?
Because we think we're not supposed to.
You're not supposed to, but it's one of those things you should have done before Shabbat, right? And it's not a core level, it's not a direct level prohibition, right? It's only certain types of prohibition. So he's sort of taking the opinion that this is not direct, this is not, meaning when you take a position this is not a core direct Torah level prohibition, then there are more exceptions. This is the exception. Now the exceptions come into play, right? It's not a core level prohibition. But, right. So why do we ask the non-Jew to do these things?
We're not even supposed to directly ask, we're supposed to hint.
Right, well, it depends. I have to give a whole class on that. But certain situations you're allowed to directly ask. It depends on what's going on. Depends. Is it the most efficient thing to do to ask a non-Jew? We go to your neighbors, go to the people on the street, whoever you find on the street. Is it the most comfortable conversation to have? Not always. Then you have to explain. I don't do this thing. Can you do this right? It's something you don't want to do. You only do if you really have to, right? So it's the things you should have done. They're not core. prohibitions, but it's also not ideal. It's an inefficient way. You can't, it's an inefficient way of getting anything done. To ask the non-Jew to do this one, and then this one, and this one, right? First of all, if you ask some random non-Jew to sweep your whole house, they're probably not going to do it. Second of all, then it's like, oh, we need the whole house swept. Okay, we asked this non-Jew to do it, this part, and this one. It's very inefficient. Okay, from the work point of view, from getting things done. Why we let non-Jews work is a whole another question, which changes in medieval Christian lands when non-Jews have their own rest day, but that's a whole different class. Okay, so as a way of doing it, if you absolutely have to, you can ask the non-Jew to do it, or, skipping the parentheses, the second to last tabbed in line, v'chein, al yedei beged o matlit o kanaf avaz hakalim ve'eno mishum mashveh gumo. If you use a cloth, or a piece of clothing, or a cloth, or a goose feather, because these are light implements, you're never going to really come to level off the floors. Meaning, this leveling off the floors becomes the paradigm of the extreme cleaning, right? You can understand, you couldn't, it's very hard to clean the whole house with a goose feather, right? I guess the modern equivalent would be, a dustpan versus your vacuum cleaner, right? The vacuum cleaner can get the whole place done. The dustpan, not as efficiently. So, again, we're limiting the types of floors, but also the types of cleanings and the type of implements you're using in cases where you absolutely have to, and you can do inefficient or just spot cleaning. So, if something got dirty and it absolutely needs to be cleaned, then we started the discussion about when is absolutely necessary, when we think it's more necessary, when guests are coming maybe. But that's the point there. Okay? All right. The next is just about cleaning in general. So this comes out, I was discussing with you about sorting. You said about sorting. We're going to come to sorting. Borer. What is, you guys have heard of this prohibition of sorting on Shabbat or not heard about it? Yes, what can you not do? What can't you do? Can you? Do we know?
Separate like things from...
Right? And right. Okay. This is not a class in Torah, but do you know when the cases you're allowed to separate? So the case you're allowed to separate is if you take the good stuff from the bad, not the bad from the good, and the things you need now, the good from the bad, basically, and the things you need now. We'll see that more as we look in. But the interesting thing about Borer is that up until, I don't know exactly when, but certainly before the 16th century, and Borer has been discussed since the Mishnah. There's really no discussion of Borer as it applies to anything except for food. And we're going to see that they make up sort of this, quote unquote, the rabbis, and we'll see which rabbis, one rabbi who's mentioning this idea of how it applies to non-food items as well. And a lot of people get into this, are really upset. How could they make this? They never talked about anything but food. So the argument here is that they didn't make it up. They did, but they didn't. The same idea can be found in earlier sources, but it's not categorized under Borer. It's categorized, and we're going to see under Moksa. But let's look at it. Questions about what I just said before I go in? There's a lot of implications for this, by the way, because if you want to look up something, like I'm not allowed to do something, you normally go by the category. What is Borer? What's involved in Borer? But now I'm claiming to you that this cleaning idea actually crosses different categories. And do you guys know what Moksa is, by the way? Mm-hmm. Okay. So if you want to learn what you really can and can't do, you can't necessarily just look it up in all the sources in that category. Okay, but in any case. Rabbi Yossi, we're looking at the Mishnah. I got these pictures a long time ago, I don't remember from where. They are not historically accurate. But Rabbi Yossi says anything, you can move anything. Nothing is muksa except for these two things. Okay? These are the big saw or the spike of the plowshare. These may not be historically accurate, but what do these types of implements have in common?
Used for work.
They're pretty extreme work. You would never use either of these things for anything else. Okay? And then, if I remember correctly, Tosefta actually lists, I think, more as well. Perhaps included was like an anchor. Something you would never use for anything else, except for that purpose. Okay. This is still Rabbi Yosef's opinion. You can move things whether you need them or you don't need them. Rabbi Nechama Emer, you can't move anything. You can't move a plate unless, for example, or a piece of clothing, unless you need it. When would you, which is a strict opinion, and by the way, we're going to see in a minute, we don't accept either of these two extremes. These are two extremes of moksa. When would you move things that are not moksa? When would you move things that you don't need? Let's put it that way. When would you move anything that you don't need?
Oh, okay, when I came home Friday night and I took off my sweater, I hung it up in the closet.
Okay, so that's one option which we're going to see, which is permitted, at least by later sources, which may not be what Rabbi Nechama was anyway thinking about, maybe it was, but you're trying to just, you don't need it, well, that's you don't need it anymore, but you need it, that in fact might be even the categories that you need it, because you need it off of you. But it may be also you want it to be, so you don't throw it off, you just don't dump it in the middle of the street because you don't want people to steal it. You don't want it to get damaged or stolen, fine. But assuming that that's not a factor right now, why would you move something that you're not worried about getting damaged or stolen, or that you don't need removed from your body or your persons?
Clean, to clean.
That's it. You use it for cleaning, right? You move things and organize them, right? Sorry, you probably saw where I was going with this cleaning. Okay, so the way it comes out in the Shulchan Aruch, which is much later, 16th century, Kli shlachto leheter, which is how it's categorized, an item that is for permitted work, Malachto leheter, that its work is permitted, and it's used to do permitted things. Mutar l'tata afilu eno ala l'tzorach kli shemi yishber yiganev. You can move those things even if you're worried they'll get stolen or broken. That's not what we're talking about. If you're going to move them like you have no need for them at all, meaning the other things, you're cleaning, right? You're organizing, cleaning. But the exception is kitfo kodesh v'ochlin mutar l'tatam afilu l'shalo l'tzorach klal. Kitfei kodesh, holy works, books, or food. You can move them no matter what. And I think this is probably similar to the cups you can clean no matter what, because it's Shabbat. You eat on Shabbat. You learn on Shabbat. So you can move those around. Okay? So here's where it comes out in this Bora B'Kelim, right? Again, an idea that hasn't been mentioned in relationship to stuff, not non-food items. So if you look at the Mishnah Berurah, who's early 20th century, he lived in Lithuania. Rabbi Yisrael Meir Kagan, who's he passed away right before the Holocaust. And, very authoritative Eastern European rabbi. Katvu Achronim, the later sources, meaning post Shulchan Aruch, and he's talking about Bora, sorting. The sorting applies to B'chol Davar Shem Shnei Minim, anything that's two different types of things. Kagom, Kelim Uvegadim. Kelim are vessels, dishes, for instance, or clothing. Sheach Barel. Sorting is a problem for those things. You have to take the one you want now, the clothing you want now, the vessel you want now. You have to leave the ones that you don't want right now. So he gives an exception case. And the exception sort of proves what he's talking about, though, too. Let's say you have a lot of clothes on the wall hanging. You want shirotzech, you want to get your coat right now, or your whatever piece of clothing. Lilav show. Because you're going to wear it. But it's on the bottom. All the other coats are on top and your coat's on the bottom. You take all the other coats off to get yours. He says that's not a problem. Okay, in theory you might say because you're moving those away, you're sorting them. But that's not the point. The point is, if you're going to use it now, if it's plates you're going to use now, if it's clothing you're going to use now, then you can take it and there's no worry. But if you're sorting clothing or sorting dishes, right? If you're folding the laundry or putting away the dishes, for example, right? That's what's prohibited. which goes back to that's the housework, that's the things that you need to get done because it's on your checklist of things to do, and you shouldn't be worried about all the things you need to do on Shabbat, right? So that's where it comes, which these people didn't make it up, is what my argument. My argument is that this idea existed in other areas besides cleaning, but formally, at least in this example, it would have been categorized as muksa. It would have also been prohibited, but the thing, if you don't need those at all, you shouldn't move them because that's muksa. Now we don't call it muksa, we call it borer. We call it sorting. Okay? Interesting? Okay. So the last page, I got 4 minutes. I would love to go through this. There's so much to do here. Is there some interesting... This is just a compilation of sources mostly from Shmirat Shabbat Kehilchata, which is written by Rav Neuberg, it's his first name, I can't remember, who was a student of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, who was a 20th century Israeli rabbi, very famous, and very, respected amongst many communities of Jews, not just, just the Haredi community or just the modern Orthodox community. Plus, I have some footnotes from Moshe, who's a famous American rabbi, Rav Vadia, famous Sephardi rabbi in the 20th century. Maybe I'll let you look at this, and I'll just summarize now because I want to get done. But it's very interesting. If you look at this, what's allowed and not allowed, you can see they're sort of maneuvering here. They don't want you to do preparatory work. You can see that, the things with sorting the dishes. But if you need it now, you can take the silverware you need, right? And the same thing goes with cleaning, toys and books and things like that. And then if you look down, I'll mention just outside, like doing dishes. There's a whole discussion about what kind of implements you can use for using dishes. Can you soak things? Can you rub them with your hand? If you don't need them now. Can you put them in the dishwasher? Yeah. Meaning there's some, if we're worried food's going to get stuck to it and it's going to take you an extra X amount of time after Shabbat, so we'll let you soak the dishes, but you can't use steel wool, right? For instance, that's like heavy duty cleaning. And you have to use these special brushes. Have you seen the Shabbat brushes? The people like they sell them. The Shabbat sponges, the plastic things. They don't hold the, right, they're not as effective, at least at holding the soap. And then there's some discussion about when you can clear the table, but at a certain point you shouldn't, if it's so late in Shabbat, right? If it's right before Shabbat ends, just wait till Shabbat ends. Don't feel like it's something you have to do right now on Shabbat. And then there's some trying to find the middle ground here. So, in summary, I'm trying to make a lot of arguments in this class, but I'll try and summarize them this way. First argument was Shabbat is not just because God said so we do Shabbat. There's a clear ethic, which is, if not primary, if not the only, certainly a primary purpose of Shabbat for everyone to get a chance to rest, not just the wealthy or the people who are allowed have, for whatever reason, don't have to work. Then, two, that is not just that malacha is work, but work is not just the things that are prohibited of Shabbat are not just the things you're paid to do, but also this idea of anything that these responsibilities, these things I have to do, which ends up being preparatory work. Okay, and there is some exception made for certain things. First of all, if you need it right now, we need meal. We need to get ready for the meal that we're about to eat. That's part of Shabbat. So we got to do that now, so that's okay. So first of all, things you need now. There is some things that are permitted in certain circumstances if they're inefficient, low scale. We saw that with this cleaning, with the feather. We're asking the non-Jew, but you can see that in this list also. You'll see that a lot. Things that are less effective are more. There is some recognition that there will be some long-term damage if you don't move it right. We're allowed to move things if they could get damaged. Certain things if they're allowed to get damaged or they're stolen. And then there is some discussion about like making your bed and cleaning the table. There is some recognition that you want things just to look clean. And we saw in the earlier source, at least if there's guests coming, there's a push to allow more cleaning. So, right, with this cleaning, it's not so straightforward because it's not just you can say clear cut, it's across the board prohibited all the time because we make these exceptions, okay? We did see also just methodologically that there were some voices that were saying, this is what I think you should do and the other people are sinners, but if you look later, the people who took the strict opinion were allowing made certain allowances in certain cases when they felt like it wasn't as extreme a cleaning. And then we saw this idea that, we saw that the same idea, the content behind this law, if you try and unpack some of the content behind these categories, you can see some of the content actually will switch categories. I was showing you from Moksha to Bora, but from Moksha to Sorta. All right, how long have we been over?